Welcome back to Between the Levees. I have with me today Mr. Lee Hendrix, retired pilot, retired River Lorian, worked for on the American Queen and on the mighty Mississippi for the Army Corps of Engineers. Mr. Hendrix, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yes, sir. You were mentioned first with Captain Pete Charmataro. He mentioned your book, and I flashed it up there. So we'll certainly get into that some more. One of my previous guests is a if I may consider him a close friend in the barge industry. I will say he is, but he every book that's ever mentioned on my show, he's sort of a bibliophile like I am, and he orders everything and fusses at me for stocking up his shelves. But we'll get into all that, sir. Let's start out, I guess, where this all begins. A lot of names on my show that you're familiar with, you've known over the years, worked with. But let's start with you. Where were you born, sir?
St. Louis, Missouri,
What year would that have been, if I may?
1949.
1949. All right. Did you have family involved in World War II?
My father was in World War II, yes,
Was he in the like Merchant Marine or
in the
what was
Navy.
okay. What did he do during the war?
He was a captain on a boat, a smaller ship, not a aircraft carrier or anything like that, a smaller ship.
Okay.
They were doing some troop transports in the Pacific.
How long was he in the Navy?
He got out. Well, he actually started as a Navy flyer before the war, but that didn't work out so well for him. And then he kind of got out. And then when the war started, he got back in. So I guess altogether 4 or 5 years, maybe something like that.
Okay. Did that drive your career? Did that steer you into the industry?
No, not at all, really.
Okay. Okay. Well
As a
then,
matter of fact, he didn't want me to go when he found out I was going on a boat.
gotcha. Well then, let's work our way to that. 1949, born in St. Louis. Tell me about life growing up in the 50s and I guess any stories you can share that made you the man you are today and drove you eventually to the industry.
Well, it wasn't the wonder years. My mother was what you might call a lonely saint, and my father did his best to give her a lot to pray for. He had a lot of problems. I think a lot of it was what had been left over from the war. I think there were some things that happened there that he didn't really want to talk about and had an effect on him. And he drank to excess. And like most people who drink to excess, when you're a kid, you never know what it's going to be like. So I mean, someday he would come back and he would say, "Well, let's all go to the ball game," and we'd get the best seats in the house. We couldn't really afford it. And then the next week, wouldn't see him for several days. So it was extremely hard for me growing up. It kind of it kind of made me, but the one saving grace was my nana. Well, my mother doted on me because
Were you an
she
only child?
well for 8 years, then my sis came along,
Okay. Okay.
so I was an only child for quite a while. Um, but my nana was she was bedridden with arthritis, but I would go in and sit on her bed, and she'd tell me stories, and we lived with them. We lived with Nan and Papa, uh, and that was so that kind of pulled me through, kept me from falling, I guess, completely off the deep end. But then they both died in the late 50s, and then I felt uh, more forsaken, I suppose. And my life was I was famous for not being famous. I guess one might say I wasn't a star in school or anything for that matter. However, they did take me down to the river, and when I went down to the river, I looked out over it in St. Louis. You know, it's really as it is in New Orleans. It's big and powerful, and I said, you know, one of these days I'm gonna I'm gonna seek my destiny out on this river. I didn't know exactly how it was going to come down. I had a vague notion, but I dreamed a lot, and like people, you know, like a lot of people who grew up in alcoholic families, it's easy to fall if into fantasy, dreaming about something that's better than what you have, which wasn't a lot. Didn't have a whole lot because the structure of the family died when Nan and Papa died, and then my dad became like even worse in terms of like providing for the family. Uh, so it was hard. It was a very hard childhood.
Well, how old were you on that visit to the river?
Oh, we would go. So my dad would take me to Hall Street in in St. Louis, which was an industrial area down by the river, and they had rail yards and things of that nature, and rusty cans and rusty nails, and you know, it's just like something something dystopian about it. It looked like the whole world had kind of blown up around you. But we could get down to the river, and I would skim my rocks across out in the river, and he would find a big rock, and he always had a six pack of Budweiser or Bush or something, and he would drink his beer, and I would just look out on that river and say, "Man, you know, this river is beautiful and powerful and free, and it's like everything I'm not." So one of these days, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna get out there. But it was actually not until I got out of college that I really sought uh, to go out there as a as an employee, as a person to be out on the river professionally.
Before we get into your schooling and then into your career and onward from there, I know you said you were, I think you were on the water in the 70s. So
Right.
a lot of history to talk through, but um, grandparents, I assume, were born in the late 1800s.
Yes.
Do any stories come to mind, especially interesting, or were they in the St. Louis area as well?
Well, Nana liked to talk about the Civil War. Uh,
Okay.
I think I never got the whole. She was, I think, born in Pilot Knob, Missouri, and Papa was born in Fort Madison, Iowa, which is right on the river. I finally got to the point where I could make the Fort Madison Bridge pretty well. But I didn't know that until just a few months ago that he was. I went back and looked at his birth certificate and found that he was born in Fort Madison. But Nana used to like to talk about the Civil War. I think one of her parents might have been from the South and one from the North, which was I guess made it kind of chaotic. there there must have been some juicy conversation about all that. But I would sit on her bed and we'd pretend like we were riding horses into battle or something. I don't know. It was strange, but it was good for me because it kind of got me away from the things I didn't want to deal with.
Well, I got you. Then I guess you said you weren't a superstar in school or anything, but you did mention, of course, college. So, how were the high school years for you? And then what did you study in college? Did you finish? How did you end up on the river?
Well, I wasn't real popular in high school because I didn't have any money and I didn't have a car, so I wasn't going out and dating anybody. Um, I played football, but I wasn't very good. Um, I was all right in school, but my friend MR and I, who I went, now he was a very good football player, but we would sneak out of school and we had a creek that we would go through and we would go down to his house and we would shoot baskets and drink beer for part of the day, and then we would sneak back later in the day. Um, so I managed to do all right in high school. I think I graduated with a 2.7 grade point or something like that. It was good enough to get me in the University of Missouri, not Harvard, not Stanford.
Yeah,
Uh,
I was not an Ivy League candidate myself. Well, then, what did you study in college?
Business of all
Okay.
things. My mother really wanted me to go to college because she had had a very tough childhood, and my dad uh, my dad actually went to Washington University and got a degree from there, which is a pretty prestigious place. Um, and but he didn't, he didn't really. I will say that this for him, he never directed me in any sense of the word, so I never felt like I was under his authoritarian discipline or anything. He just kind of let me go on my own. But mom really wanted me to go to college, so I went to University of Missouri St. Louis because I couldn't afford to go out of town. And I studied business, and I also studied history as a minor, which uh, which I actually liked better. But I figured I'd end the business degree, and so in 1972, I got out of graduated from UMSL with a BS in history and in marketing.
That was my degree as well, 2008, so a couple of years later.
Yeah, pretty.
Um, well, then, how did you find your way from there into the to the river?
So I liked to party back in those days, and
Speaking of, you mentioned, I wrote it down. You mentioned drinking beer on the creek with your buddy in high
and
school. Did the alcoholism bug, I guess, catch you, or were you able to dodge it?
no, I'm completely alcohol free for 40 years. But back then I was not at all alcohol free. As a matter of fact, I was hitting it pretty hard. I was partying pretty hard. Um, but I went to a party and I was a guy I knew in high school, and he had worked. Everybody was going to Europe then, getting a Eurail pass and going to Europe, but I couldn't afford that. I didn't have enough money to do that. So um, he mentioned the fact that he had gone out and worked on a boat and made enough money in the 30 days that he was on the boat to get his Eurail pass and go to Europe. And I thought, well, that sounds like a template that I can follow. I can do that. Um, so, and I always, again, felt that my destiny lay somewhere out on that river. And I didn't know anything about towboats. I mean, to me, it was like if you went on the river, it was like showboat or something. But uh, I started looking for places to get jobs on the river, and they the yellow pages said towboats, and I thought, well, man, they got like tow trucks out on the river, and you go up with your diesel power hat on and your coveralls, and you hook somebody up to a tow truck. And how in the world does that all work? But that was the ones that I went to, and I lived in University City, which is a suburb of St. Louis, and there was a Huffman Towing Company in Clayton, which was very close. I went there. Went to Rose Barge Line, went to another couple and put in some applications, and I didn't think anybody was going to call me.
And this was around 72, 73.
72, yes. And on October 9th, of 1972, Huffman Towing Company called and they said, you want to go out on a boat? And I thought, well, I guess, yeah, it's time to fish or cut bait. I'm not, I was working then for University City Public Works. I was working on the street department, filling holes and ditches and carrying garbage pails. It was hard work. It paid all right, but it was kind of like not real satisfying. It wasn't very romantic. And I thought, yeah, I'm ready to go out on one of these boats. And I thought he would give me a week or two to back out of it, because most jobs you get, they say, well, report in 2 weeks. And he said, well, I need you to get on this boat called the Havana Zephyr. And I thought, well, my goodness, I'm going to Cuba, something. I don't know. It turned out it was Havana, Illinois. And I still thought he would give me some time to back out of it. And I said, well, when do you want me? He said, I need you there tonight on Riverview Boulevard. And I was like, oh, my goodness, I've come to the crossroads like Robert Johnson. I got to either do this or back out of it. So I told my mom, and she, oh, no, no, you're going to go out there. The river's going to swallow you up alive and you're going to be buried in mud for an eternity. And my dad said, nah, you're not going to like it. You're not going to have your dog. You're not going to like the food. You're not going to like it. You think you shouldn't do it. But I had a half a mind that I was going to because I wanted to get away. And so I packed my duffel bag and we headed on down. He had an old 55 Chevy green car and we drive down to Missouri Portland Cement Dock and they told me to be there at 5:30 and I walk out to the loading dock and there's a couple dudes there loading barges and they said, "What you doing here, man?" And I said, I'm catching the Havana Zephyr." He said, "What time?" I said, "Well, 5:30." He said, "Dog, man." He said, they's always late. They ain't gonna be here at 5:30. They're always late." And that was one of the more. He told me two prophetic things that night. That fella did. He said they're always late, which it turned out they usually were. They were always late for when you were getting on the boat because they didn't want you to be late, is what it was. And then he asked me after about the third time that I was sitting there, and my dad would come and still try to talk me out of it. And we'd drive around a little bit and he'd bring me back. And after three times of that, this man says, hey, dog, you got a girl? And I said, well, yeah, because I kind of did. And he said, well, she ain't going to wait no 30 days for your ass to get home. You ain't going to have a girl when you get off that boat. And he was right. That was another prophetic thing he said. She didn't wait for me. And not only did she not wait for me, but that became a revolving pattern in my life for the next 11 years after I finally got on that boat. That we finally showed up that night about almost midnight where I finally got on.
And tell me about that experience getting on there for the first time at 11 o'clock at night.
Hmm. So I climbed down the ladder onto this barge, and there's a fellow about my age. He looks at me 6 ways to Sunday. He says, "Where are you from?" I said, "St. Louis." He said, "What?" He said, "St. Louis." He said, "What? What you, son? I swear." And then he would start walking me back toward the boat, and I come to find out that every other deckhand on this boat was from Kentucky, and they had all gotten hired out of. They were all from two different counties, Meade and Breckinridge County, and the port captain lived there too, and he hired all these fellas out of a beer joint named Dead Horse Holler, and I was the only one on the boat, only deckhand on the boat who wasn't from Kentucky. So he's filling me in on all this because I'm kind of like a DEI hire, in St. Louis, man. And so I'm figuring, well, I don't know, maybe some guy fell in the river or something. They needed me right away in St. Louis, but I was still seeking my destiny. So I said, I'm going to do it. And we go, this boat was more vintage than me. It was built in 1947. It had a rounded, you can Google it sometime and take a look at it. It's still pushing barges. It's not called the Havana Zephyr anymore. It's called the Merlin Banta now. But anyway, he starts telling me, he said, you're on the front watch and you're going to actually start your river career off watch. You're going to get to go to sleep. And that, that sounded all right. Because I was getting kind of tired. So we go through the lounge and all the furniture's torn up. Linoleum's pulling up off the floor. And I got a room with another, I don't have my own private stateroom, obviously. I got a room with another dude. And he opens up the door and he doesn't even knock. He just opens the door and switches the light on. And Bobby, who's my roommate, he thinks all of a sudden he's having a dream probably about him and his gal, driving along the Western Kentucky Parkway or something. All of a sudden now the light's on and he thinks he's being pursued by the Commonwealth of Kentucky State Patrol. He leaps out of bed down onto the floor and cuts his foot. And he starts bleeding all over the floor, all over his Green Lantern comic book. And not only bleeding profusely, but profanity, the most profuse, but yet artistic profanity I'd ever heard in my life. And it was just the syntax and the rhythm were just beyond belief. And I was standing there in amazement thinking, I wonder if my dad's left, because I was ready to end the trip right there. And I thought, well, maybe I could run out on the barge. I can go run down Riverview Boulevard and say, hey, if you see an old man in a green Chevy, stop him. I need to get off this boat because I don't think I want to do it. And he's still bleeding and cussing, but Daddy's gone. He's not going to make it back. And I guess, well, it's time to make the most of it. So, but I didn't sleep all that first night. And I didn't sleep for 5 days, as a matter of fact, because they kept running into things that night. And I thought the whole bulkhead was going to come caving in. What they were doing was they were making up tow, but I didn't know what all that banging on the out on the decks was. And I woke up the next morning and we're still in St. Louis, going up the river. And I thought we must have surely, in 6 hours of that kind of banging around, I knew we were going up the Illinois River. I thought, well, maybe we're in, I don't know, Peoria or someplace. And wound up, we were still in St. Louis. And I thought, man, it took us 6 hours and we haven't even gotten out of town yet. This is a trip to the wild side that I had never envisioned, and it's really slow. But I come down for breakfast, and there's one chair left at the table, and it's right at the head of the table. And I thought, well, I don't know, it's an empty chair. I'll grab it. And all the guys sitting around the table are just like kind of cracking up, kind of smirking. And this older fellow comes down and he goes up right behind me. He says, "You in my chair, boy." And it's the pilot. So I had very inadvertently sat in the pilot's chair and given everybody that probably made their week, that seeing that happen. Then the chief engineer, later that morning, he starts telling me he liked to sit in the galley and drink coffee with the cook. That was like his favorite thing to do. And he said, son, if you ever wear out a pair of boots on the deck of a barge, you're going to be on the river forever. It'll be in your blood. And I thought, man, this is what I'm after. this is the lyrical beauty that I'm after. He says, then he says, he goes on to say, not only that, since you're coming on in October, if you make it through the winter to the spring, it means one of two things. You're either tough enough or dumb enough to make it. I can't tell by looking at you how tough you are, but you look like you might be dumb enough. And that became kind of my unsolicited sobriquet, dumb motherfucker. Whenever the mate wanted me to say, get that DMF out here, because I was almost, I was hopeless out there. I mean, all the other guys, they had, they were from, they had known people who'd worked on towboats before, and they came from this kind of towboat culture, I guess, where their family had been on towboats. But I knew absolutely nothing about it. And they all figured out I was really, really pretty stupid. But I was trying hard. And the mate who, oh, he really didn't like me because, when you got a green deckhand, it makes everybody's job a lot harder. And he, I thought to myself, like I had these visions of going on the river and being showboat. And what it kind of turned out to for the first week was like Billy Budd or something, mate Claggart out of Billy Budd. I thought this guy, he's probably do anything to get rid of me, and make my life really hard, which he did. He made it very hard on me. But the one thing that he did do was he said, "You need to learn how to throw a line." I said, "Sure, why not? Sounds like fun. Sounds like something I could take, spend some time doing." So, well, all the other deckhands were drinking coffee or telling jokes or something. I was actually out there on those barges practicing throwing lines. And I did it for hour after hour after hour and listening to music, get my little get my little transistor radio and throw my lines and listen to music. And I'm starting to make some I'm starting to make friends with these dudes. They're from Kentucky. I didn't know much about Kentucky except Daniel Boone was from there. But we eventually found some common ground. We got to be really good friends after a while, and I kind of started liking it after that mate got off, and another mate got on who actually wanted to try to teach me something. So he couldn't call me a dumb motherfucker anymore. Just more of a dumb motherfucker, I guess. And so it got to be pretty cool at that first trip. And it was kind of like, well, I used to like to watch John Wayne movies, and it reminded me of like being on a cattle drive with John Wayne and Walter Brennan or something. It's just like got instead of cattle, we got barges that we're pushing. And I'm still trying to figure this all out because it's a new world to me. I'm still Alice in Wonderland, but I'm slowly starting to pick it up.
What kind of tow were y'all shoving and on what route?
Well, we were going up the Illinois River mostly, but we would come and we were loading barges out of Missouri Portland Cement Dock there at what was called the Old River in St. Louis. And we would load them there, and then we would take them up to up the Illinois. We usually wouldn't get up to. We would turn a boat. You're familiar with that phrase, I'm sure. So they had a smaller, or they had what we called a jack-off pilot house called the Catherine L, and we would turn tows with the Catherine L, and they would take the loads up to Chicago, and then we'd take their empties and bring them back down to St. Louis. Then we'd pick up some other barges along the line, and we mostly did that. My first trip.
Well, you mentioned in a sort of preliminary phone call that there might be a few stories from the 70s and early 80s that would never be heard of these days. So if you want to delve into that and kind of fill me in on, I guess, the first decade of your career out there on the water.
Sure. So I'm starting to, after a while, I'm starting to figure that, you know, maybe if I don't get killed right away, because I first thought that the mission was to kill Lee Hendrix. It was so dangerous out there because we were getting ice on the river. And, but I'm starting to think, well, maybe, I can advance to becoming a mate or maybe even a pilot. I don't know. So I'm staying with it. It's I got it figured out that it's pretty dangerous, and it's right at the nexus I would call of danger and fatigue and loneliness. So there's a lot of things you got to watch out for. So you tried to stay straight, but back in those days, you could go to town, and as long as you made it back, you'd still have a job. And there was a bottleneck back in those days. It's called Lock 26, with 26 sat the upper Mississippi River, but it was also below the mouth of the Illinois River. So there would be lock delay. And this was the heyday of the towing industry. There was just all kinds of boats waiting at Lock 26. And crew members would go to town and disappear. There was no cell phones back in those days. So we had a crew member by the name of Bust Up Bill. And Bust Up Bill disappears off the boat. He says he's just going to the 10 pin or the Buccaneer for a drink. And he's gone for 2 days, and we still haven't locked. We're still in turn, but we haven't seen him. So the captain gets these two burly deckhands. One of them looks like The Rock, and one of them looks like The Undertaker. Calls him up to the pilot house, and he peels off two $20 bills. So $20 was a good amount of money back in those days. He gives each of them a 20. He says, "You go to town, and I don't care if you got to go to every whorehouse and every beer joint in that town. You find that son, and you get him back." So then they're gone, and nobody knows what's happened to them. So now it's time to lock. We got to get a crew together to go through the lock. And we pull up into the lock, and it's a bright sunny day. And they're at lock 26, and a lot of the locks on the upper, they had a viewing gallery where people could come and they could watch boats lock through. So there was just like, there must have been 25 or 30 people in this viewing gallery watching us go in. And we pull into the lock, we get in the first cut in there, and all of a sudden, from over around the back of the lighthouse, lockhouse, it sounded like a cat fight. And there they have it. The Rock and the Undertaker have got Bust Up Bill, and they're carrying him like a wheelbarrow down to the boat. And he's screaming and yelling. He's not big, but he's wiry. He said, "You motherfuckers, put me down. Put me down, goddammit. I know 16 Cuban gangsters in this town. They're going to come out here and they're going to fuck you up." And he's just going on and on and on. And they're holding him and getting him down to the boat. And there was a lady there who looked like she might have been a school teacher, bless her heart. She leans over and she says to one of the guys, she said, "Pardon me, do you have to get your deckhands back to the boat like this all the time?" "That ain't no deckhand, lady. That's the goddamn pilot." Oh, and that was kind of the way things would occur sometimes. Uh, there was there was drugs, there was weed, there was alcohol. A lot of people kept alcohol in their room. Uh, but I finally got a pilot's job, and it was on the Ohio River. We had two barges. It was on a boat called the Charles Foss, and we had a captain on there named Al. And Al had some stories that they were beyond comprehension, actually, to the point where you think he's got to be making this shit up. But there was a lot of that back then. Still is for that matter. But he was a reformed alcoholic, and he and his brother used to go to go to beer joints, and they would get drunk, and before he became reformed, and he would always tell me this story. He'd say, "Buddy, we went into this beer joint there in Metropolis, and we were having a good time, and all of a sudden there was 20 of them wanting to get in a fight with me, and I started whipping all their asses, and they started running out." And some of them were going toward the door, and my brother Russell was at the door, and I said, "Close the door, Russell. Some of them's getting away from me." And that was just the type of it was the type of thing that happened. Is that enough, or you want more?
Well, please carry on. I've got nothing but time.
So now this didn't really have much to do with alcohol or drugs, but uh, I finally got a pilot's job on this boat on the Charles Foss, and we're we're going on the Cumberland River,
Was that with the same company?
same company. And the Cumberland River back in, we didn't have any electronic charts back in those days. You had to know the river and you had to find your own. So the Cumberland River's got all these little coves back there, and they've got buoys back there that they're not much smaller than the buoys actually are on the river. So I'm scared half to death because I'm a new pilot. I got 5 loads of cement going up this river, got the searchlight. Searchlight, I'm waving it all over the place. Uh, Buoys, probably heard the old phrase that the buoys look like they've been dropped out of an airplane. That's kind of the way it looked to me. So it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I could see somebody coming into the pilot house, and it's the chief engineer. Now he's off watch at midnight, so it's kind of unusual for him to be up. But he comes into the pilot house. It's dark, of course, and I look, and he's got his rifle with him. And I said, "Well, good morning, Chief." And I was thinking, well, why you have a weapon in your hand? And he must have read my mind. And he said, "We going deer hunting." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah. You take that searchlight you've been waving all around this river like you a rookie, and you hold it on that buck over there." And sure enough, I took that searchlight and trained it over on the bank, and there was a buck sitting there. And I thought, well, venison would certainly be good for Thanksgiving dinner, but I said, "Is it deer season?" He said, "Son, around here we got 2 seasons, and that's salt and pepper. Don't worry about that. Let me handle the rest. You just hold that deer. You just hold that searchlight on that deer. I'll take care of everything else. We're going to have venison for Thanksgiving dinner." And I thought, well, that seems pretty good, except for the fact that it's not very ethical to hunt deer like that. I was thinking, and probably quite illegal. And I knew that the Kentucky State Prison at Eddyville was just right around the turn, and I could just see myself holding a searchlight on a deer in the middle of the night and killing the deer and winding up in Eddyville. So I got to get out of it though. But he's crazed. He's got this look in his eyes that he wants this deer more than anything else. So I'm trying to figure out how in the world I can keep from winding up in Eddyville and still not keep from getting shot. And he runs down there. And he said, hold that light on him. I'm going down on the barges where I can get a better shot. So he runs down on the barges. He kneels down. He takes aim with a 30-06, and that's when I steered the boat real hard and missed the shot, and the deer runs back into the woods. And he said, "What the hell did you do that for?" I said, "Well, I was going to run aground. I had to steer." And I still to this day, I hope he's not listening to or watching this. He probably to this day remembers that. And I don't think he knows where I live anymore. So it might be all right.
Let's see. I had some questions, but man, I'm really enjoying the storytelling. Artistic profanity is the most hysterical phrase I think I've heard that applies to this industry. That same guy I was telling you about that ordered your book.
Yeah.
I think he'd appreciate that term. But
Yeah.
anyway, okay, so some thoughts came to mind as you were speaking. Of course, it seems these days we're to some degree over-regulated, over-inspected, over like it's too much. But then you hear things like that, and of course, historically in that era also, people would just pop open drip pans and drain them out on the way to New Orleans. I
Yes.
mean, people reminisce about the good old days, but that was when it was cowboy time, I think. And are we overregulated today? I don't know. That may be another topic we can cover. But all these stories, all these things I'm hearing that a lot of folks don't want to talk about, especially on this forum. Um, there's a reason that the industry is shaped the way it is today. And, the guys that are out there doing it, that they kind of brought that on themselves to some degree.
I would agree with that. I have a very good friend named Reed Williams who uh, he started line. He works for Artco, and he started line boating. And don't worry, Reed, I'm not going to give anything away on you. But he started working in the line boats in the 1990s, and I would tell him all these stories about what we did when we had these opportunities to go to town. And he said, "Yeah, y'all really fucked it up for us, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, we did a really good job of doing that." And it was rough. There was a lot of crew members who would take off and disappear, get in fights, get thrown in jail. It didn't cast us in a real good light in a lot of ways. I mean, there was a lot of people who could go to town and drink a few and come back and do all right, but it was so. Uh, going on a little further in my life, in 1982, because I was getting tired of the desolation of it, I still enjoyed doing the work, but the desolation, plus, I still all my girlfriends were still leaving me, and it was just time to get off and go do something else. And I left the river in '82 and didn't really go back out on a towboat until about 1989. And in that period of time, they had stopped letting crew members go to town. So out of the clear blue sky, I was working at the Board of Education in St. Louis, and I get a telephone call, and he was with Marquette, predecessor to Marquette. I forget his name. But he gives me a call and he says, he must have had my name on a trip list from way back. He says, you want to go out on a boat? And I was making like $10,000 a year working for the Board of Education in St. Louis. Yeah, that might not be too bad. I can supplement this income pretty well. And he was paying 2.25 a day. I said, yeah, I'm on. So again, it was just the same kind of thing as it was back in 1972. I need you tonight. So they bring a crew van. And I told him that I hadn't been drug tested, which by that time I wasn't doing any drugs anymore anyway. Uh, I was really straight. And he said, we don't need to worry about the drug tests for right now. And but I do need you. But we take this tow up to Dubuque, and we tie the tow off in the river, and we take the boat back in. It was another boat that I worked on back years before, and we take the boat back into the ice harbor. And I'm just going to go. I didn't have a cell phone. I was just going to go call my wife and get a newspaper. And he says, "Where are you going?" I said, well, "I'm just going to go make a phone call." He says, "You get off this boat, you get your duffel bag, and don't come back." So that's how radically things had changed. And now, of course, it's like the only boats that you can still go to town are the government boats. The Corps of Engineers you can still get off, and the passenger boats. you can get off too. But the towboats, no, you can't. You might as well just have an orange jumpsuit on.
Well, fill me in from there. You ended up, of course, on the American Queen and on the Mississippi. So, what was I guess, the chronology of your career? How you found your way to those two?
So I had a mentor named Adrian Hargrove when I was working for Huffman, and he was like, I mean, to me, river pilots were like gods. Man, most of those guys I idolized. They just were. They were right. They were bigger than life, and Adrian was more bigger than life than any of them. Because you got all this weight out in front of you. You got these responsibility for all these people, but yet a lot of them had this just like almost like a, a cavalier attitude about things. That they were just had this brimming with self confidence and decisiveness. And I said, man, these guys are so. But Adrian was he he was the quintessential riverboat pilot as far as I was concerned. But he took a liking to me, and that's kind of how I became a river pilot. But I was getting I was getting lonely. It's desolate out there, as you've probably heard from people before. Um, and back in those days, of course, we could get off at times, and now it's even more desolate. And in 1982, after a, a breakup of a girl who I really was serious about, I said, there's something wrong with me. I think I gotta do something different. Now, the one good thing about not being married or not having any kids was I was able to save some money, and it was time for me to make my trip to Europe. So I worked another year on for Huffman on the Ruth D. Jones, and I saved up enough money where I could go make my trip, and I wound up living in Europe for about a year and a half. And while I was over there, I needed to work because I'm just the kind of guy, because I came from poverty, I guess I feel like I'm always going to go broke at any moment. So I started working for the school there in Germany that did outdoor education with kids. And we would climb mountains and we would go canoeing, kayaking, get lost in the woods, that kind of thing. And I came back to the U.S. in about 84, 85, and I found out that there was a thing called the Mississippi River Youth Expedition that was going on. And they were taking kids all the way down the Mississippi River in canoes. And I met a man named Hank Schaefermeyer, he was like one of the ramrods of it. So I told him my background, that I had worked in outdoor education and that I had been a towboat pilot. And he kind of like, what? You really did that? I said, yeah, I did. He said, well, I think I can use you on this trip. So it kind of got me thinking about going back to the river again, even though for the next 4 or 5 years I stayed in the experiential education department. And I finally did meet my wife. I finally found a woman who would stick with me. And this friend of mine, Tom Ball from St. Louis, and I would take uh, teachers and other gypsies and vagabonds on canoe trips up on the upper Mississippi, which is where I live now. And we were just having a grand old time. We had these two 26-foot fiberglass canoes, and we would camp out on sandbars. I told him, I said, the thing that you can really give a treat to the towboaters is when they come around the turn, we all moon them. And I think people thought I was joking at first. And I said, no. I said, we just need to give this poor boy a group moon. So there's this towboat coming around Betsy Slough, which is around Fountain City up here. Finally talked just about everybody into doing it. And he came around the turn. we had a campfire going, and we all turn around and we moon him, and he stops that boat right in the middle of the river. And I guess he called the whole deck crew up there to take a look at these fools mooning us out on the sandbar. I guess the devil must have made me do it. But anyway, so we're having a good old time doing that, and my wife comes up to me and she says, "You having fun out in those canoes on the river?" I said, "Yeah, I'm having a really good time, Diane." She said, "Well, we're not making any money, so I think you need to find a job where you can make some money." So right at that time was when the gambling boats were coming on board. You know, the gambling industry had talked the voters in Iowa and Missouri and Illinois into the fact that it was much more moral to have a casino on the water than it was on land. It would just erase all those sins if it was out on the water. So they passed those laws, and then in the meantime, I had been working for Gateway Riverboat Cruises out of St. Louis. They had one boat called the Belle of St. Louis, and by this time I'd gotten a 1,600-ton master's license. So I worked on that one, and then I worked on they had boats called the Tom Sawyer and the Huck Finn and the Becky Thatcher, and I was working on those. But I really wanted to kind of get back out, making a little bit extra money, more money. So these gambling boats were paying pretty well. So I went up to Davenport and got on the President and worked there for about a year, and then I got on the Empress River Casino in Joliet and was there for close to a year. But about that time, Adrian, who had left towing, and he had gone over to get on the Delta Queen and the Mississippi Queen, Delta Queen Steamboat Company. That's what they called it then. And he said, "Son, I think you can get over here, and I think you'll do really well for yourself." By golly. And I thought, man, yeah, but I got to get all that pilot license, don't I? He said, "Well, you got those trips in down on the lower and those trips in on the upper. You can get documentation on that. You just go to Don Huffman; he'll give you some, or you can get the documentation." So I did, and for close to a year, I was out tripping on boats down on the lower, which I didn't have quite enough time, and going over to the Coast Guard in St. Louis and drawing sections of river, and I finally drew 2,300 miles of river and got on the American Queen in 1995. I would work on the Delta Queen and the Mississippi Queen as well, but the American Queen was the main one.
Now, was that all as pilot?
Pilot, yes.
Well, do you want to touch on the Mississippi now, or did you jump to the River Lorian position?
Oh no. So I stayed on the with the Delta Queen Steamboat Company for until 2008, when they just had this annoying habit of going out of business. Uh, and again, my wife says, you got to go to work for somebody who doesn't go out of business, because you go on unemployment and then you got to find another job. They would come back in, but I would get a job somewhere else and then go back. And so then that's when my friend Pete, who I'd known on the Delta Queen, he told me that they needed assistant masters on the motor vessel Mississippi. So by that time I had gotten my any gross ton license, and I had all this pilotage, and they liked that fact. And I got that job as assistant master on the Mississippi in 2009, and September 2nd of 2009, as a matter of fact. And was on there through the big flood of 2011, and then in 2014 I noticed I had a bruise on my side, and I couldn't figure out what it was from. And I went to a doctor and several doctors, and they told me that I had stage four lymphoma. And I I had to take several months off to get chemotherapy treatment for that. Uh, and when I went back, I was there back there for just a few months, and then Pete decided he wanted to go do something else, and I I didn't really want the master's job, but then I didn't want to work for some of the other people who I knew were putting in for the master's jobs, and then some of my crew came up to me and asked me to put in for it. So I put in for it, and then voila, 2014, I got the master's job on the Mississippi.
Any interesting stories come to mind of events or incidents that you were privy to or part of on that boat?
Well, there was a 2011 flood. Uh, you know, when you go over there, you got three missions on the Mississippi. Uh, First mission is most of the time you're taking uh, concrete revetment from one of the three mat yards, which is at Richardson Landing or Delta, Louisiana, or St. Francisville, Louisiana, and you're taking it to where the convex or concave part of the bends are to strengthen the bends so that the bends do not wash away. So we would deliver that to those job sites, and then the second job was we would take the Mississippi River commissioners. Now the commissioners have been the commission has been in force since 1879, and they would have inspection tours every year. We would go to two inspection tours. A lot of it was just down on the lower Mississippi, but we would go to other rivers, like we went to the Arkansas and the Red River, and we went up here in the upper, and just a lot of different places. So we would chauffeur them around. Well, the third mission was, and the mate, Satch, who was, bless his heart, rest in peace, he said, "You, good captain, we're never going to have to do this. Uh, but if we ever have to, we got to take them bomb barges from Memphis up to Bird Point and blow up that levee." I said, "What? We're going to blow up a levee?" He said, "Yeah, because if it's too much pressure on the rest of the levees in the system, the whole system may become weakened. And so what we do is we blow that levee up, and then we create like a sluice. So you got to then blow up another levee down by New Madrid to let the water back out. You're never going to have to do it, but we got to prepare for it." Well, in 2011, it just kept raining and raining, and we had a big snow year out in Colorado, and so you had a lot of water coming down the river. We still weren't convinced that we were going to have to do it, but I think it was on May 1st. No, it was toward the end of April. Toward the end of April, we finally loaded up the bomb barges, and we took off up the river. And we still didn't think we were really going to have to do it, but we got up to Hickman, Kentucky, and we anchored in the harbor there. And then it rained for like 2 days solid, and the general, he didn't really have much choice. He said, "Well, we're gonna have to blow the levee up." So we took the barges back out into the river, and we anchored them across from an economy boat store there at Wycliffe. And I didn't take them back. They were braver individuals than me. Uh, but my friend, my real good friend, Kerry Lewis, Captain Kerry Lewis, was in the smaller boats that took those barges back there, and it was really rough. You know, the water was up on almost on top of the levee. They almost waited too late to do it. So water was almost breaking over the levee. But that night, May 2nd, or maybe it was May 1st, I don't know. But it's about 10 o'clock at night. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden I hear this kaboom, kaboom. And I thought it was another thunderstorm coming. Then I look up and I see this wall of flame going up into the air. And that's when they had detonated that Berg Point bypass. And so then we left there and went down to New Madrid the next day and had to open up the bottom part of it to let that water uh, come back out. And then we had to get back down through the Booth Point Bridge, which we weren't really sure we were going to be able to do. But we went through there making about 15 miles an hour. And then we just basically followed the flood all the way down to Louisiana. And then we wound up having to activate the Morganza floodway in that year as well. And yeah, everything was open. The old river was open, Morganza was open, Bonnie Carey was open. It's anything we could do to get rid of that water because there was more water in the system then than there had been in 1927, and we were just able to control it a lot better than they could back in 1927. And unlike 1927, there was hardly any damage. Not too many people lost homes, and I don't think anybody died as a direct consequence of the 2011 flood. So I think we as the Corps did it, and it was a very small part on my part. Uh, we did a really good job. That's something we were all, I think, really very proud of.
What was the cargo? What was the explosive material? And how do you know how that was arranged to actually blow up the levee?
Yeah, so in 1937 they had made this levee, and then they had put these tubes down in because that was like the fail-safe plan that if we need to do this, we're gonna pack the explosives in there. Now the explosives in the barges themselves were really quite benign unless they were mixed together. It was the same kind of a thing that Timothy McVeigh used at the in Oklahoma City. I forget the exact names of it, but it was I've got it in my book, but I forget. It was two things that you had to mix together. So they had to take these barges back in there and put them down, put these materials into those tubes, and then ignite them.
Was that ammonium nitrate?
You're right. That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ingram, we don't much mess with that stuff. So how was that trip up? So it wasn't mixed, was it ammonium nitrate and something else, or the two items that made that ammonia and
It was ammonium nitrate and sodium's. Someone to say sodium something. Ammonium nitrate by itself is not explosive, but if you mix it with this other stuff, I got the book right here.
sodium bicarbonate, huh?
Maybe that's what it is.
Anyway,
Yeah.
whatever. I'm no chemist. Just curious on that. But was that any sort of nerve-wracking? I mean, the stuff was it in separate barges, I imagine?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was really nerve wracking because we were trying to get up there before we could uh, see. We had to get up there before we couldn't fit underneath the Booth Point Bridge, and so they waited. I wouldn't say that we waited too long, but we waited long enough, and so we were kind of under the gun to make it up there. And then the first night out of Memphis, I was on the front watch, and we're coming up through the harbor. It's not a big tow, but it's volatile, even though in their current state they're not all that volatile. But a really, I think it was a tornado hit right above the bridges. We were right up there around Lucy Woodstock, around Redmond Bar, when this big tornado hits, and I lost complete. My radar was out. My electronic chart was out. I was just kind of navigating by maybe my swing indicator telling me that I wasn't turning around in the middle of the river. And I met a boat up there, and he was southbound, and I was northbound, but he got out of my way, which is totally against the rules because we had the right of way over everybody. on the river then. We had four Coast Guard boats following us, one on each corner, small boats. And I'm expecting a cow from Arkansas to come flying into the pilot house at any moment. But we lived through it, and eventually the fog and the rain started clearing up. And thankfully, I'm still going up the river, but I was really worried about these Coast Guard boats because I hadn't had any radio contact with them. And I was thinking, oh man, I hope they haven't sunk because that storm was bad enough that they could. And they made it through. And we made it the rest of the night. And we got up there to Hickman, and just that's when we stood by and waited for to see what the river was going to do, because obviously there's a lot of people didn't like it. It was not very popular at all in southeast Missouri because you're going to flood out 130,000 acres of really prime farmland. So the reason we had those Coast Guard boats around us was because they were armed, because there was very much the thought that there could be some saboteurs out there who might come and try to sabotage the mission. It was to the point where it went all the way to, well, the senators in Missouri, I forget who they were at the time, tried to talk the Corps out of doing it. And but no, we had reached the point that we really had to. It was now or never. Um, and then it went all the way to President Obama. The administration gave their okay, and actually, I think went all the way to the Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken. And so then the handwriting was on the wall. It was going to come down.
Quite the story, quite the experience for sure. Anything else come to mind from your time on the Mississippi? Not necessarily that drastic, but something else interesting. I do want to talk about the American Queen, your experience on those boats, but I don't want to jump past anything that might be worth sharing for that Army Corps boat.
Well, the Mississippi, I think of any boat that I've ever been on in my life, I felt a really strong attachment to my crew. Um, and it was just the normal kinds of stuff. But there was one incident that happened. I was I eventually wound up having to have a hip replacement on my right hip. But before I had it, I was walking with a really significant limp. But I just love getting exercise. I can't stay on a I can't stay in one place. I love to move around. So we're on the Arkansas River, and we pull into Dardanelle Lock, and the commissioners are on board, the general's on there. Uh, and I decide I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to leave the mate and the pilot in charge, and I'm not going to go for a very long walk. I'm going to walk a mile or two up the road. So I didn't take my wallet with me, and I threw on an Iron Maiden t-shirt and some camouflage shorts. And I'm walking up the road, and all these cars are coming. I don't know what in the world's going on. There's some kind of something going on further down the road, and these cars are like shining their uh, headlights into my eyes, and I got to get off the road because they're blinding me, and I got to go into the ditch. And they just keep coming. They finally quit coming, and I said, well, I'll just walk maybe another quarter mile, and then I'll turn around and come back. So I walk another quarter mile, and going back toward the boat, and I see lights behind me. And I thought, oh my God, what's going on here? I thought maybe it was somebody going to hold me up or rob me. It was turned out it's blue lights, and it's some lawmen. And I said, oh, hello. And he says, we've been getting reports of an old drunk out here walking around on the road. Would that be you, son? Old son? I said, sir, I hadn't had a drink in 30 years. No, it ain't me. And he says, well, let me see your ID. And then I remembered I didn't bring my wallet with me, so I had no ID. And I said, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't have my ID." And I could feel this thing kind of slipping off on me. I'm becoming like more of a public enemy now rather than just some kind of an old drunk menace. And he said, what you doing out here? And you could see the Mississippi. Now, the Mississippi, if you've never seen it, it's bigger than any towboat in the world. And it's sitting right there at Dardanelle Lock. And I said, "I'm the captain on that boat." And he says, "Do tell." He said, "Well, I guess I must be Sinbad the Sailor." And he said, "Let's just go down there to that boat and see if any of them boys on there recognize." So I said, "Well, at least somebody's going to get me out of this because I don't want to get thrown in jail because then the captain's not going to be on the boat next morning when the commissioners get ready to go on their trip." So he follows me down, and at least he didn't put me in the back of the car. He follows me all the way down, and the mate's there, and I start looking at the mate. I gave him the eye. I said, "Man, let's not be playing here, dude." I think he picked up on that. And the cop says, "You recognize you know this old man?" He said, "Yeah, that's our captain." And I said, "Hey, mate, show these fine gentlemen around the boat and give them a tour." So made it back to the boat all right. But the next morning at breakfast, the general, who had a really good sense of humor, I said, "Now look," I said to the crew, I said, "Look, y'all, don't be spreading this." Well, of course, they did. The general comes, he puts his hand on my shoulder. He said, "We're glad you made it back. We didn't want to have to bail you out of jail this morning." So everybody took it in stride, I hope. But yeah, just a lot of really good experiences with those fellows, and I still stay in touch with a lot of them. And I still go back. I would go back and trip on the boat last couple of years, and still had a good time. I have a very fond remembrance of that boat and the American Queen. Actually, the American Queen being my other, old home, I would say. Uh, but on the American Queen, I went back. I found out that they were looking for some pilots, and I had been doing some trip work and some other kind of stuff. But I'd stayed in contact with Bert Suarez, who you interviewed. And I said, "Bert, y'all need any pilots?" And he said, "Yeah, I think they might need some." So they called me, and I went back over there in 23 and did some more trip work. And it was still some of the old folks that I remembered from them. Not too many had made it through all those changes. Um, and I piloted on there, but there was always something about that River Lorient job that really intrigued me because the American Queen, when you go down through a railroad bridge or something, you actually have to go outside at a wing bridge station to make a lock to go down through a railroad bridge. And I would see that River Lorient with all those really fine people. He'd be out there showing them around, and the wind would pick up a little bit. He'd say, "Well, it's getting a little windy out here. I don't think we want to be out here." I'd be out there in that 35-mile-an-hour wind trying to go down through that railroad bridge. And I said, "I don't know what kind of money that boy's making, but he's having a whole hell of a lot more fun than I am. So if I ever get a chance, I want to do that." And of course, everybody thought I was crazy, which I guess maybe I kind of am. Um, and if I ever get the chance to do that, I'm going to do it. And they had a River Orient job come up, and it's about 1/7 the pay that the pilots get. But it was it was really a lot of fun because I thought, man, this is a mission in life. It's kind of like what you do. It's like telling people about the river, bringing the story to people, bringing these years of experience, and they love those stories. They love the story of like the Sultana, I guess maybe you've heard of that one. Are you familiar with that?
Does not sound familiar. No, sir.
So briefly, after the Civil War, there had been these prisoners in Andersonville prisoner of war camp in Georgia, and they had been grossly mistreated. But the war was over, and so they brought them over to Vicksburg, and they loaded them up on this boat called the Sultana, which was supposed to carry 376 passengers. They put over 2,000 people on this boat. Not only that, but they had boilers that were about to, uh, well, they didn't, hopefully they didn't think explode, but they had leaky boilers. And
I think I do remember this story.
okay, so
Please carry
make a
on.
long story short, from here, one night above Memphis, the three of the boilers exploded. And of the 2,500 people on the Sultana, 1,700 of them died. And it was the worst nautical disaster in U.S. history, worse than the Titanic. So they like stories like that. They like the story of the Natchez and the Robert E. Lee racing up the river. They like, because I had worked with the Corps, they could come to me and they could ask me, what are these dikes for? And what is this concrete here? And I would give them an answer that made sense to them. So they really enjoyed the fact that I had been a pilot and then I had been a captain, because they thought that that gave me a sort of a feeling of authenticity about what I was telling them. But what they really liked was those stories like I was telling you about, those stories about the nights on town and about my first night on a towboat and my own personal feelings. Um, so uh, I had been writing. I always loved to write. Even when I was in grade school, I loved to write. And I wrote a lot of stories, oh shoot, back in the 1990s, but I just kind of kept them on my computer. I never really was able to sell them very much, although I was able to sell a couple to the Big River magazine here in Winona. But I thought, well, maybe I can put these together into a book and I can sell that. But one thing one thing about being a nerd in school, I learned rejection very quickly in life, and that every author's got to learn rejection. So I got rejected by just about every publishing house that there is, except one day I got an email from the University Press of Mississippi, and it started off really very beautifully, like, we really enjoyed your writing and stuff. At least they're going to reject me in a nice way. But I kept going on and on and on. I said, this is not a rejection letter. They actually want to publish my book. So it took another 2 or 3 years before it finally got uh, published. But a lot of the passengers, I guess the point that I'm getting to is a lot of the passengers that I knew on the American Queen uh, have bought my book and have recommended it to other people.
Well, fantastic. I was just checking too. It looks like did they produce the audio book? How did all that work?
So they produced an audiobook later. Uh, I was not the narrator. They although people have said, well, you've got a pretty good voice, you should do it. But they had their own professional do it, and it was better off. He's really good, the gentleman who does it. And he nails the Southern accents a lot better than I do, which there are a lot of Southern accents in the book. So it's available on audiobook, and now it's available by University Press of Mississippi. And I'm also writing for a platform called Substack, which I'm writing some short stories on. I wrote a novel, but I haven't been able to get it published. But I'm thinking that maybe if enough of my short stories get read, maybe somebody will do it. There's, as you probably know, there's very few Stephen Kings and John Grishams in the world, and most people, if you have a daughter, you sit down, you tell her the facts of life, and you say, whatever you do, don't marry a musician or an author because you'll be in poverty your whole life, which most authors are destined to be poor unless just luckily my wife and I both had careers outside of outside of writing, so we're not we can feed the dogs. Let's put it that way. But I do writing more because for its a mission, I want people to know about this life that we lead, and people don't. My people here in Lake City, you can't really see it, but I'm actually looking out on the Mississippi River right here. I could throw a rock in the Mississippi River from where I sit. It's called Lake Pepin, and we'll go out walking with our friends, and they'll say, "Oh man, that must be really romantic being out there on one of those barges." And I'll say, well, you got a lot to learn because first of all, you don't live on the barge, you live on the towboat. And though it may have some degree of romance, it's not very romantic 99% of the time. But I want them to know what an honorable profession that it is that we are in and with the hardships that we have to endure.
I've heard some stories. I forget who it was now, but similar to what you said of living out on those barges, that somebody had told me that there would actually be, housing quarters inside the barges, like maybe I don't know, in a wing tank or a hopper or something. But a lot of fun with all that. Tell me, you mentioned, of course, Pete and Bert already.
Yeah.
Where along the line did you meet Frank Rivera? And earlier you mentioned to me on the phone, did you ever work with Allison Bailey?
I never worked with Allison. I met her on the river a few times. I knew who she was. I knew she was a pilot on the American Queen, so I would talk to her on the river. But no, I have never had the honor of meeting her in person.
And how about Frank? When'd you meet him?
Now, Frank, so I went back over on the American Queen as a pilot, and I was still interested in this River Lorien gig. And on my time off, on my off watch, I would go down there, and he would hang out in the chart room, which has all the books and really wonderful place on the American Queen. And he would hold court there, and I would come down and I would talk to him, and I'd ask him about what it was like to be a River Lorien, and and conversely, if he had any questions about the river, I would help him out. And I said, man, I would just love to do this job. And lo and behold, I'm pilot on the boat, and he comes down with COVID, and he can't go and talk to people. This is 23. COVID's still kind of making its way around. And I said, well, you know what? I think I could do a couple of lectures for you. And he had had me down to talk to groups before, and nobody threw anything at me. So I said, well, let me give it a try. And the people really liked it. They just had a lot of questions about what it was that I did, and they felt like when they asked me a question that they were going to get a really legitimate, valid answer to their question. Not that Frank wouldn't, but and I thought, well, maybe I can do this. And so later the next year, it turned out Frank wanted to take a month off for personal reasons, and I went over there and did a month as River Lorien, and then the next year he decided not to come back, and here I was a show enough River Lorien on the American Queen, and that's kind of how all that went down.
Well, I guess we can close on this unless there's any other points you'd like to touch on. But uh, any good stories or anything interesting? Of course, protect the innocent to whatever degree necessary. But any stories of passengers on on those vessels cutting up or anything especially uh, impactful?
Most of them were past the age of having too much fun. The crew members would have too much fun occasionally. Um, but well, we'd wind up having to stop every once in a while for we had a lot of medical emergencies, so we'd have to touch in for that. Uh, the passengers were great. I loved them.
Now, did the vessel have to wait for that passenger to be assessed and brought back?
No, normally what would happen is they'd send a representative from the crew with the passenger to the hospital, and then most of them would make it back because they were paying for that trip, and they just as soon die on that boat as they would in that hospital room. So they ever get that back on that boat, whatever they had to do for the most part. Um, it was just a really good time. I would walk, or as I say, I love to walk, and but the fourth deck was where I would hold court, which is had the best walkways for the boat, and on those beautiful moonlit nights down on the lower or up on the upper, I would just walk around on that fourth deck, and passengers would be out there, and they'd just be taking it all in, and I'd say, you know what, they're nothing like the steamboat thing, is there? No, they're sure, because they were getting but there are no more overnight passenger steamboats left on the Mississippi River. The American Queen was the last one, and it's really very it's a sin and shame that it's not still out there, and there still are passenger boats, overnight passenger boats. So there's Viking and there's ACL, and they put out a good product. I work for ACL as well. I'm not going to say anything bad about the product they put out. They're really good, but there's something about watching that pitman arm stroke that paddle wheel round and around, and it's like William Faulkner said, the past isn't dead, it isn't even past, and you really get that. You get that idea being out there you got that idea being out there in America, that you were truly reliving history.
I don't think there's a better way to end this one, sir.
All right. Well,
I
thank
do
you.
thank you. I thank you for your time here today. I'm glad we could finally get this lined up. Anything else you care to share?
Oh, you to show my book? I can show a copy of my book right here.
Oh yeah, I'll flash it up on screen and I'll add a
Flash it up
link.
on the screen.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can do that.
Actually, if anybody wants to buy it now, there's a 2-day sale going on, 50% off. You just got to go to University Press of Mississippi uh, webpage, and the hardback and the soft cover are 50% off, but just for 2 days. Plus, it's free shipping, and we got to wonder. It's a wonderful life in a lot of ways out there on the river, but it's hard, and I just want to be able to share a lot of that, and to honor the rivermen who have gone before me and the ones that will go after me, because it's a profession like no other.
Well, sir, here is to good health and good book sales. I think I will likely miss the cutoff for the 2-day sale. This is not going to be published in time, but
Well, you can buy it at full price. I'll get a bigger copy.
absolutely. That sounds good, sir. Thanks again.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate your time.
Talk to you later on.
All right, bye bye.